Yes, you read that title correctly. No, this is not clickbait. Yes, I'm going to give some clarifications because the title is by nature very short, cannot answer every question. Yes, we are going to be looking at evidence and information, drawing our conclusions from the evidence, not just pure speculation. Yes, this is going to be an oversimplification. Yes, we are going through a lot of information quickly, not covering everything. With all of those out of the way, let's jump into things. Welcome to the Enemies Within the Church podcast. You can go to EWTCnews.com. That stands for Enemies Within the Church. EWTCnews.com to view the documentary if you haven't already, to view the web store. We've got that up a little bit better, more integrated, and we're going to be doing more with that. You can also view the continued projects, articles, this podcast, everything right there on EWTCnews.com. You can also go to the Patreon, which is linked in the description. It is also linked on the website. If you go to the support button, I might be tweaking that a little bit just for clarification's sake. But go to the Patreon if you want to support the work that I am doing for the podcast and for the website. It's not for the entire Enemies Within the Church project. It is for those continuing smaller things in the articles, as well as for the podcast in particular. So if this has been something you enjoy and you want to see it continue, and specifically in the form that it currently is, or suggest improvements, I'm willing to hear improvements, then please consider donating to the Patreon. If you want to donate to the larger Enemies Within the Church project, we are happy for you to do that as well. We've got some larger projects in the works. Again, that's one of the reasons that we're doing the Patreon for the podcast, again, specifically for me to be able to dedicate time to the podcast. But again, let us get into things. Marxist origins of modern education. Oh my goodness, there are so many pieces of caveat and clarification that could be given for that, to both be more specific, but also to silence people who are going to say, yeah, but. We're not going to go into all the yeah buts here. It is not yeah but season on the podcast. Oh my goodness. Now that I say that out loud, one, I miss Sam. We got to get Sam back on the podcast for an episode soon, even if he can't join us permanently. But I think we might need to do a yeah but season episode where we respond to questions about topics that had previously come up on the podcast. But Marxist origins of modern education. So what do I mean by modern education? That can be a term that can be very broad. A lot of people use modern education going back even to the 1700s, some people the 1800s, particularly in the United States, the mid to late 1800s, when the public education system starts to really become a thing. More universal education starts to really become a thing where not necessarily high school, but it's becoming expected for there to be public education, for people to go through this education. That really becomes a thing in the mid to late 1800s. For what I'm talking about modern education, the 20th century and 21st century. What we would think of as the heart of the modern era. After the massive changes that we see coming through the 1800s and the sort of wrestling with these new changes in the 20th century and the beginning of the true modern era. Because just as so many other things were changing and at the turn of the century, so was education. And the early 20th century saw radical changes in education, just as it did across the board with so many things. There were so many new hot ideas. Secular humanism was on the rise, socialism, Marxism, collectivism. There's this race to see what was going to be the new economic model, the new political models, the new structures for society. Everything was changing. time of rapid fluctuation. And as I mentioned, education was no different, and it was not isolated from these other areas, such as the rise of secular humanism, atheism, uh, evolutionism, the rise of socialism and Marxism. All of these things played off of one another. They just played a game of leapfrog, where one would start to advance and that would pull the others forward. Then something else would advance a little bit more ahead and then pull everything else. It was really a group effort of ideologies. That shouldn't be surprising if you understand Marxism. You understand that it requires an atheistic evolutionary worldview in order to function. Again, so does secular humanism. It requires this atheistic evolutionary worldview. They all cooperate. And there's a need for a new religion. A new religion. Talking about the early 19th century, early 1900s, there was a recognition of a need for a new religion. Not a replacing of religion, but a new religion. They understood mankind so much more. In fact, secular humanists said nothing human is alien to the religious. And that was not religion, it's infected everything. No, it was, we see religion as an innately human need, and thus we are proposing a new religion, a religion devoid of the myths of the past, an advanced religion. Now, obviously, once they became, I almost said in the majority, and functionally they were in the majority. They were in the majority in the West, even in the United States in the mid to late 20th century. But once they got to a certain point, they could then turn things and say, oh, well, we're the superior ones. We're not a religion. We need to get rid of you religious people. It was sort of, hey, guys, we can play, your games too. We can play in your club. Let us in. And then once they gain a little bit of power, oh, well, we're going to kick you all out. But this early humanism, this early secular humanism, this early atheism was a little bit smarter in the sense of understanding humans' spiritual needs, religious needs, the needs for a cohesive worldview that answered life's big questions. Now, again, this all plays into the idea of the Marxist origins of modern education. So we need to establish this because this really becomes the root of it. And the key player we're going to look at is a key player in the rise of secular humanism. He is a devout secular humanist. He is pushing these ideas forward, and he's open about it. Let's read a little bit from Humanist Manifesto number 1. Now, as the name might imply, it was a manifesto, a declaration of intent for humanists, for secular humanists, for atheists. What did they want to see accomplished? This was written in 1933 and is it's a relatively short document, but oh wow, is it potent. And can you look back at this nearly 100-year-old document and go, oh, that explains a lot. Especially if you have any understanding of the secularization of the United States in the 20th century. You go, wow, this was a plan, and they're open about that. But let's read a couple things from the Secular Humanist Manifesto number 1. This is the introduction itself. The time has come for widespread recognition of the radical changes in religious beliefs throughout the modern world. The time is past for mere revision of traditional attitudes. Science and economic change, they see economic change as part of the upheaval of religion. Now, yes, that is tied, not necessarily a direct appeal, but that is definitely tied to Marx's desire to dethrone God. He saw the the revolution that he was bringing never happened. He saw that as, a part of uprooting and removing God. They see this as well. Science and economic change have disrupted the old beliefs. Religions the world over are under the necessity of coming to terms with new conditions created by a vastly increased knowledge and experience. In every field of human activity, the vital movement is now in the direction of a candid and explicit humanism. They were very aware of the need for change. Now, I mean, if you read this with any degree of carefulness, you'll see just the oozing arrogance of it, which is something worth noting. We're going to see that in greater detail, and we're going to talk about that briefly, but let's continue on. There is great danger of a final, and we believe fatal, identification of the word religion with doctrines and methods which have lost their significance and which are powerless to solve the problems of humans living in the 20th century. So, traditional religions are now powerless in their doctrines and methods to enact change to solve the problems, the new problems, the modern problems of a modern era. Religions have always been means for realizing the highest value of life. Their end has been accomplished through the interpretation of the total environing situation, theology or worldview, the sense of values resulting therefrom, goal and ideal, and the technique, cult. And by cult, they just mean set of beliefs, set of ritualistic beliefs, established for realizing the satisfactory life. Now, I'm going to pose a question to you. Is that the purpose of religion? Is religion about realizing the satisfactory life? Again, this is what I was talking about, that oozing arrogance. For them, it is. For them, the ultimate goal in life is personal satisfaction, a satisfactory life by their definition. Thus, they impart that onto, well, all mankind is selfish, which is true. Therefore, all mankind is seeking a satisfactory life, and religion is a means to that end. So there's a little bit of a bait and switch there, because Christianity is, we find a satisfactory life, but not by the traditional human definition. It is a life of self-denial, not self-indulgence. Radically different. Continuing on, a change in any of these factors results in alienation of the outward forms of religion. So if you change the factors that make up a religion, it changes the outward form of that religion. This fact explains the changefulness of religions through the centuries. So religions, by their interpretation, change and adapt as time goes on to fit the needs of the moment. This is very much situation ethics, except it's situation religion. What they're doing here, well, let's read this last line. But through all changes, religion itself remains constant in its quest for abiding values, an inseparable feature of human life. Again, religion is the thing that gives life meaning and satisfaction, and thus we need a religion. This religion must be a new, evolved religion, as all religions were evolving over time, one that meets the needs, the economic and scientific realities, the needs brought about by such increased knowledge of the 20th century. What they're doing here is fascinating, because they're feeding us, they're telling us the lie that is going to be fed to a generation. Now, we talk about things like cultural Marxism, wokeness, social justice. Hear terms like, gender is a social construct. or that race is a social construct, or so on and so forth. X thing is a social construct. That is a key feature of this deconstructionist view of reality that is central to critical theory, that is central to cultural Marxism, that is central to what we call wokeness or social justice. But we act far too often like it started here in the very late 20th century and into the 21st century. This idea of feeding us ideas and reducing things down to mere concepts rather than having any tangible attachment to reality. Gender is just now a concept built by society. It's not attached to anything real. But listen to what they were saying here. Now, these are, you can go through the list, and we might do that at some point, and you're going to find just nearly without exception some form of socialist beliefs or collectivist beliefs or just openly Marxist beliefs among the signers. It was the hot thing of the day, and you're going to find that. Now, you're also going to find that they were much more culturally focused. As you might hear by this, they weren't concerned strictly with economic. They saw that as a big thing, but also scientific and its impact on society and quest for meaning. That's not traditional Marxism. That sounds much more culturally focused, or maybe you might say cultural Marxism. Now you might understand a little bit of what they're doing here. They're establishing and feeding us the first lie that was necessary for us to adopt later lies to get to a point where we could separate gender and think it's just this thing that societies come up with. Well, they're feeding us the same lie, but about religion. That religion is simply a social construct. Now, doesn't the 20th century make a lot more sense? Doesn't it make a lot more sense? Listen to what they're saying here. That's what they are saying. That's what they're planning to do. They were successful in that, and they were very much able to separate religion from its foundations, and in particular Christianity, because that is what they were contending with. That is what they're contending with. It's not all religions. The religion they had to contend with was Christianity. Again, another little bait and switch thing. But let's continue on. Today's man's larger understanding of the universe, his scientific achievements, and deeper appreciation of brotherhood. So, curious thing. With his increased advancements, he's has brought about a deeper appreciation of brotherhood. Religion or Christianity doesn't bring that about. We've evolved past that, and we've become more understood more of our mutual brotherhood. This is hilarious because these are the same kind of people that were promoting eugenics and classical racism, evolution-based racism, and measuring people's craniums to see how advanced they were, all sorts of silly things. And these ideologies led to World War II in particular, and you can't separate it from so many other atrocities that happened. It's hilarious in a very dark and morbid way. Deeper appreciation of brotherhood as they were dividing mankind in a way that we had never seen, on a scale we had never seen. Undoing the brotherhood that Christianity had been building in the West. So, and a deeper appreciation of brotherhood have created a situation which requires a new statement of the means and purposes of religion. Such a vital, fearless, and frank religion capable of furnishing adequate social goals and personal satisfactions may appear to many people as a complete break with the past. Well, this age does owe a vast debt to the traditional religions. It is nonetheless obvious that any religion that can hope to be a synthesizing and dynamic force for today must be shaped for the needs of this age. To establish such a religion is a major necessity of the present. This is straight up just an application of Nietzschean philosophy. And if you don't know much about Nietzsche, oh my goodness, he literally died insane, like actual legitimately insane. Um, but he was big on the idea of the need for supermen to rise up to replace the soft values of Christianity with their new hard values to lead mankind forward into the new era, a new age of prosperity and brotherhood. All these people were all just rabidly seeking this utopia that they saw, the unshackling that evolution had brought, the unshackling of man that evolution had brought. And again, I think you can see that pretty clearly. Let's read a couple more things before we get into it. Because again, one of the signatories of this, one of the crafters of this document is who we're going to focus on. And you see a lot about his intent. This is part of his, it's a manifesto, declaration. This is intent. This is, hey, I've been trying to do this. So it's made up of several different points. So we're going to read a few of those points. Fifth, humanism asserts that the nature of the universe depicted by modern science makes unacceptable any supernatural or cosmic guarantees of human values. Whoa. Okay, what did I say about the need to replace Supermen to rise up to replace the soft values of Christianity with their new hard values? Well, you see that right there. There are no intrinsic cosmic guarantees, factual, absolute guarantees of human values. They are arbitrary. So, but they're declaring values here, and they're saying that these values should be promoted. So it's a fascinating thing what they're revealing. Seventh, religion consists of those actions, purposes, and experiences which are humanly significant. Religion is now no longer about the supernatural, it's now about the human. Nothing human is alien to the religious. Told you. It includes labor, art, science, philosophy, love, friendship, recreation, all that is in its degree expressive of intelligently satisfying human living. Again, very, very self-centered, very self-focused. They're revealing a lot there. The distinction between the sacred and the secular can no longer be maintained. That's an interesting statement. Again, we need to know this. They are trying to cross over and take over the religious realm. So not only were they trying to take over economics, trying to take over science and philosophy, not only were they trying to take over all these other things, but they are explicitly trying to take over the sacred realm. Ninth, in the place of the old attitudes involved in worship and prayer, the humanist finds his religious emotions expressed in a heightened sense of personal life. Whoa, self-centered much? Heightened sense of personal life and in a cooperative effort to promote social well-being. Again, their religion is a socialized religion. And that really just becomes all mankind will bow to our beliefs and be under our control. And once we have that, there'll be joy in the world. It's the same thing that Marxism says. It's the same thing that Nietzsche was saying. It's all over the place and in the time this was written. 14th, the humanists are firmly convinced that existing acquisitive and profit-motivated society has shown itself to be inadequate. So what they're saying there is that capitalism, acquisition and profit, they're talking about capitalism, that a capitalistic society has shown itself to be inadequate, and that a radical change in methods, controls, and motives must be instituted. A socialized and cooperative socialism economic order must be established to the end that the equitable distribution of the means of life, means of production, be possible. I mean, what did I tell you? This is explicitly a Marxist document. The goal of humanism is a free and universal society in which people voluntarily and intelligently cooperate for the common good. I mean, that's the promise of communism right there, isn't it? Humanists demand a shared life in a shared world. Oh, it's voluntary, it's cooperative. We demand it. It's funny how it always works out that way. Man is at last becoming aware that he alone is responsible for the realization of the world of his dreams. That he has, so utopia, that he has within himself the power for its achievement. He is God. He must set intelligence and will to the task. I mean, this is straight up a declaration of, we are coming for you. We are coming for you. We know better than you. We are better than you. We are your intellectuals and spiritual superiors. We know how to run the economy. We know how to run your life. We know how to run everything. And you're going to be happy when we control you. This is some pretty extreme stuff. Pretty extreme stuff. They were very open about the intents of this new atheistic religion. Very explicit about it. Now, it should already concern you that there's a man involved in setting up modern education, again, 20th and 21st century education. He's a framer of this. And who is that man? That man is John Dewey. John Dewey was born in 1859, died in 1952. He was an influential psychologist, philosopher, educational reformer, sometimes called the father of modern education. Sometimes that title is given to others. Sometimes called to be more specific, the father of progressive education. That should tell you a little bit right there. Let's talk a little bit about who Dewey is and the intent that he had. We've already established he was one of the framers of Humanist Manifesto. He signed on to it, helped create it, said, this is what I believe, this is my intent, this is my worldview, and I want to force it onto others. I want to force this cooperative utopia. Ugh. So if you doubt that Dewey was for clarification's sake, I've made this confusion before, just because he's in education does not mean this is the Dewey that made the Dewey Decimal System. Different Dewey. If you don't know what the Dewey Decimal System is, just go ask your parents. It seems like I was right on the cusp of the last few years of people that were taught what the Dewey Decimal System was. So, a few things about John Dewey. John Dewey headed the Dewey Commission. Seems a little obvious. To exonerate Leon Trotsky and condemn Joseph Stalin's claims against Trotsky, aka they were siding with Trotsky's more socially focused Marxism as opposed to Joseph Stalin's approach to implementing a communist utopia. It's a early 20th century version of, that's just Marxism was implemented wrong that time. That's all they were really doing there. But yeah, he went down to Mexico, led this commission, and it was really just this Marxist get together to say, oh my goodness, Trotsky, your ideas are great, and obviously you're being misrepresented. Your views of Marxism are being misrepresented for political gain by Joseph Stalin. This wasn't like it was as much a kangaroo court as the kangaroo court that Trotsky had been through in the Soviet Union. John Dewey would complain about the higher classes and capitalism, and he would use colorful language after saying higher classes in his writing. Gotta go to his personal letters. Higher classes, and then expletives. Now, I've already made this clarification, but I want to make it even clearer. He was not a classical Marxist. He was not a classical Marxist. And he critiqued classical Marxism. Now, if you've already put some of the picture together, that's because he was a cultural Marxist. His problems with classical Marxism, the critiques he leveled, were centered around its overemphasis on economics and change through violent revolution or sudden revolution, rather than being focused on the things he saw as important, Dewey saw as important. These would be society, culture, education, ethics, change through reform, as in we're going to reform the systems over time, and that's how the it's not an immediate revolution, it's these reform efforts, so on and so forth. He was a collectivist that put much emphasis on the individual, so an individual person. You already saw this in Humanist Manifesto. They would put a huge emphasis on the individual, but only as far as the individual is part of a collective system. So it's sort of a have your cake, eat it too situation. I think that should sound very familiar to what we're seeing today with cultural Marxism, with the woke. They have a huge emphasis on the individual person, but then the individual gets drowned they become a theoretical thing, essentially, in a sea of this collective group. And in case you were questioning if he really was a socialist, beyond what we've seen so far, you want it from the horse's mouth. Well, here's an example from Liberalism in Social Action, where he says that the only form of enduring social organization that is now possible is one in which the new forces of productivity are cooperatively controlled. Very much a collectivist mentality. I think we've got enough there. We're going to go rather quickly. I don't want to prove every point. So I think we've got enough there. Let's talk about him and education a little bit. Now, he saw reforming education as an avenue to bring about a, quote, new social order. And what is that new social order? Well, that's why we looked at Humanist Manifesto. He laid it out there. He shifted education to be more values-based, although I'm not sure that's exactly how he would describe it. That's the modern way we would describe it. But it'd be more value-based and practical, as opposed to focusing on things such as reading, writing, and arithmetic. The 3 R's, if you ever heard that phrase. And for anyone that hasn't, yes, writing and arithmetic don't start with R, but R is it's immediately emphasized in the word. Okay, it's okay. Now, his ideas can very much be traced back and arguably are modification of the Prussian model of education. Now, again, with more focus on values rather than the sort of militaristic discipline of the Prussian model, but it was this, heavy emphasis on state control of the individual, state control of education, state mandated education, state forced education, and instilling the values of the state through education. Now, here's a quote from Dewey on all this. Education is a regulation of the process of coming to share in the social consciousness. Now, here's a quote from Dewey in regards to all of this. Its education is a regulation. So again, he wants to control it of the process of coming to share in the social consciousness. So the individual, it's controlling the individual's ascent into this social group, this social consciousness, the change of the individual to the collective. The adjustment of individual activity on the basis of this social consciousness is the only sure method of social reconstruction. So again, he does not want individuals. He does not want free thinking individuals. He wants individuals that are, lumped together into this collective identity. Well, why would he want that? Because he's trying to establish a new religion, an atheistic, secular religion, one where his values are forced on people. Again, they demand it. Now, the question is, when we talk about values-based education, which again, I think you can see is where we're at nowadays, values-based education, which values are given preference? Dewey was a committed progressive, secular humanist, believes in evolution, believed in socialism and collectivism, had what we would now call environmentalism, is something that he was into, and he rejected, quote, traditional authority, so on and so forth. And these were the views that his, not just his values-based system emphasized, but they were built around. They can't promote anything but these views. So again, you can see there's a gap here so far. We've got him and we've got where we're at now. And you can see, hey, what he wanted, it came about. It did come about. Now, again, there's a gap so far. How do you get from Dewey positing these ideas to these ideas just being the standard in 2024? Well, we're going to talk about that a little bit. Now, again, if you had any question about Dewey being a Marxist in his beliefs, he visited China. I almost said communist China, but it's actually pre-established of communist China. But he visited the communist-controlled areas in the I believe it was the mid 1920s, and he was very impressed. He was more impressed by the communist Chinese and their more social focus on revolution and social change rather than the Soviet Union. He had a lot more critiques of the Soviet Union, much more so when it comes to Joseph Stalin. He visited the Soviet Union many, many times, and was generally, again, still very favorable, especially earlier on. Now, once they kick his boy Trotsky out, he changes a little bit, didn't like Stalin. But he praised the Soviet Union for its progress with regard to education in sort of a lamenting way. Now, that's slightly reading into it, but that seems to be a bit of we need to be as progressive as the Soviet Union. Granted, he's still Dewey, so he goes, yeah, but they're not doing it exactly how I like, which is worth noting because he wants more. He's super, super. Again, he's an early 20th century psychologist. These guys were insane. These were insane people. He's in the, well, you just need to drink some more cocaine era of psychology. These were crazy people with really crazy views, but that he's very much motivated by this new field of psychology and just this drive to understand the person. And then his solution is, well, we need to then use that knowledge to conform them into this new social order. Now, how does one man, even if his ideas are influential, make such large changes? Well, first, he wasn't alone. He had allies. He had others that were trying to make similar changes. This was not done in isolation. Dewey is just easy to focus on, and he really is the progenitor, the one that was really able to get these ideas adopted. But how is he able to do that? If it's just ideas, it's not going to go anywhere. Well, he had big support, and I mean big support, especially when it came to finances. In this case, he had benefactors through the Rockefellers. The Rockefellers not only gave him funding, he was able to set up test schools and just, be funded to continue his work. More than that, the Rockefeller founded University of Chicago. He was brought into that and was able to implement his ideas there. He would then go on to replicate that elsewhere. So not only did he was a smart man. He knew, just like with what we read in Humanist Manifesto, he knows to go to the origin sources of things, not just the outward expressions. He's a surgeon. So he didn't just start to remake education, make test schools, make his ideas seem palatable, especially in the new era where everything just seemed to be, every new idea was being gobbled up. But he went to where educators were trained, and he was setting up and changing how educators were trained in universities, which is something that we see nowadays. We see this, well, it doesn't matter. People talk about, oh, I have this great school district. Well, it doesn't matter. You've got the Department of Education, which we could talk about doing, and what would become the Department of Education. But that's a larger conversation. You got the Department of Education for some things. You got State Department of Educations, which are not really much better. And then you're like, oh, well, there's still good teachers. Well, the good teachers are retiring. They're retiring. And what are they being replaced by? They're being replaced by indoctrinated teachers that focus on values and feels rather than actually educating people. Dewey won. He won radically. And this wasn't a war on education to revolutionize education. This was a religious war. The secular humanists made it clear that they were starting off a religious war. And Dewey led the charge when it came to education. And he won. It's not just that they got prayer out of schools. It's not just that they got evolution into schools. This was a much more fundamental ideological shift. And I mean, we very narrowly avoided. If you're younger, and by younger, I mean, 40s, maybe even a little bit older and under, you're not going to be familiarized with the battles when it comes to compulsory education, compulsory public education. We barely avoided that. You might go, oh, what are you talking about? We are kind of required to go to school. No, compulsory public education. That was very close to becoming a reality, as in no homeschool or private education. You are forced to go to school. This is the case in Germany. Germany is a great example of this. Forced to go to public school. No homeschool. I think Germany has some private education, but it's a little bit different than how we think of it. But forced compulsory public education, really close to becoming a thing. If you're old enough, you're like, yeah, I can remember that. I can remember the battles over that. I believe it was the 80s where that really came to a head. Yeah, that late. If I remember the whole situation, this is because this is a slightly different topic. We're not necessarily focusing in on this. But remember right, it was Oregon in the 80s put that into law. They tried to implement it. Other places were like right on the cusp. Oregon tried it, and luckily, because it was the 80s and things, there's a bit of a conservative ish resurgence in society. 80s was a very the conservative shift in things was kind of a dirty conservative shift, because it's way too infected by these ideas, way too infected by atheism. It wasn't a true conservative shift. That's one thing we got to remember is, hey, even when we've made some ground, there's been costs. We have a lot more work than we might think to change things. But yeah, it was luckily struck down, constitutionally struck down. Good. That I don't think that would be struck down today. I don't think that would be struck down today. Maybe, but I'm not so sure. And or at least it'd be much more of a complicated fight. I mean, nowadays they trick people into buying into quote school choice and charter schools. A charter school is a public school, by the way, if you didn't know that. Public school. It's a public school that is not part of a local school district. What does that mean? It means functionally you as a parent actually have less control. There's no school board, quite the same. Still under the same requirements as a public school. They are there strictly to compete with private schools and homeschooling. Just because they weren't able to get the compulsory public education through, they were able to attack in other ways. And we're now seeing states, it's been happening for quite a while, but clamping down on homeschooling. What's the point of all this? Now, we could go way, way deeper into Dewey, into education, into the Marxist origins of modern education, but I just wanted to clarify things that so many things have these common origin points of what we're facing. The wave that evolution unleashed in society is just amazing. And all the little people, the little cretins that came out of this that were like, yes, finally I can unleash my wickedness. Whether it's Marx or Dewey or Nietzsche, they started promoting new ideas. They started this revolution, started in academia, then started to slip into society, and now we're seeing the fruit of it. But the origins of these kind of things, they didn't start just a few years ago. They didn't start a few decades ago. It's been a war they've been It's a war they've been waging for over a century now. And gosh golly, did they make it clear what they wanted to do? And did they do it? What I want to do is expand your scope of what the battlefield really is and the need to stand up for biblical truth. We need to fight this spiritual war just like they fought the spiritual war. This was a total war, all fronts. The sacred, the secular, the supernatural, the natural. They were fighting for men's heart, soul, mind, and strength. The only way we fight back is targeting the whole man. Now, obviously, changing a man's spiritual state makes everything else dramatically easier. But we've got to fight for the whole man. Keep in mind, they were able to do this when they were just an extreme minority. And Christianity was just the default for the country. Now, nominalism was still a huge problem, especially at the turn of the century. But if they can do it, we can do it. If they could be open about what they were doing, we can be open about what we're doing. So this could seem a little bit negative, but this is an encouragement. Hey, we can gain ground back. But we've got to understand what the problem is. We got to understand how big the problem is, how long the problem's been going, and we got to fight back for men's heart, soul, mind, strength, not just one little piece. We can't just gain, we're never going to win by just focusing on politics. But we can't ignore politics. We're never going to win if we just focus on preaching the gospel. Now, I say that in quotes because the gospel is the ultimate solution. But if you separate that from everything else, well, you got a problem. You got a problem. You're gonna become a spiritual deadbeat dad. You're gonna maybe not even make spiritual babies, but you're gonna make spiritual infants that are then just going to be attacked from all sorts of different angles. It's more to do than just that. A lot of work to do, but we can do it. By the grace of God, we can do it. So I think that is enough for now. As I said, that's just a relatively brief, not even relative, that is a massive brief to the degree of being a little bit overly simplistic, but there's only so much you can cover. But just to get you a big picture view of education and how far back it was changed and just the results that produces. Now that you're a little bit more aware, I hope you can see the bigger picture of the problem. Remember, you can go to EWTCnews.com to view the documentary, view the web store, view the continued projects, the continued work we have. You can also go to the Patreon, linked in the description, to support the podcast if you'd like to see this podcast continue in the form it's in. I really don't want to discontinue it. So I'm going to always make a huge effort, no matter what, to continue the podcast in some form. But there might be hard decisions in the future if it just cannot justify the time to do it weekly. So I hope this has been useful to you. God bless you. And remember, don't go woke.